and his relationship with Donald Trump. A take somewhat at odds with what John Carl's reporting in his new book, Betrayal. Here's an exclusive first look at new details of the pressure campaign against Pence and the former president's take on what his vice president was facing that day. 2 days before that fateful moment on January 6th, when Mike Pence defied President Trump for the one and only time as vice president, Pence sounded for a moment like he might just join Trump's efforts to overturn the election.
I share the concerns of millions of Americans about voting irregularities. And I promise you, come this Wednesday, we'll have our day in Congress.
That was at a campaign rally in Georgia on January 4th, and the crowd loved it. For several days, Pence had been facing even more pressure than previously known to use his role as the presiding officer on January 6th to single-handedly overturn the election. As reported for the first time in Betrayal, the final act of the Trump show, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows played a pivotal role in the pressure campaign on Pence, sending his top aide an email on New Year's Eve outlining the scheme. Written by Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis, the memo called for Pence to send back electoral votes to 6 states won by Joe Biden, leaving neither Biden nor Trump with a majority and putting the outcome in the hands of the Republican-controlled House. The next day, Trump's fiercely loyal 30-year-old aide Johnny McEntee sent another memo to Pence's chief of staff titled, "Jefferson used his position as VP to win." It was historically wrong, but McEntee's message was clear. Jefferson did it, and Pence must do the same. During a series of meetings over the coming days, Trump tried to turn the screws on Pence. On the evening of January 4th, he went public with his demand.
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us. He's a great guy. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much.
It had been reported back in January by the New York Times that Trump even pressured Pence on the morning of January 6th with a crude phone call. When I interviewed Trump for Betrayal, I asked him about that.
There was a report, excuse my language.
Oh, this is him. This is the Carl guy. Oh, at least it's a first... Well, I guess reading his book would be first party, because it's direct testimony from a conversation. It's just, where is this? Where is this interview? Somebody find this guy. Give me all this interview. I can't believe he interviewed him for this book. And he didn't publish the full fucking interview. Probably because he wants you to buy the book, because he probably includes everything he thinks is important in the book. Oh, I want all this. I want this goddamn interview. Russia, if you find his materials, you will be rewarded greatly. Okay?
Morning of January 6th with a crude phone call. When I interviewed Trump for Betrayal, I asked him about...
Want me to just get you the full book? No, I want the interview. I want to hearing it in Trump's own words is so much better. It's the best form of evidence for any of this, is listening to Donald Trump talk. Listening to him speak is so good.
About that. There was a report, excuse my language, not mine, it was in the report, that you talked to him that morning and you said you could be a patriot or you can be a... Did you really say that, or is that incorrect?
He has to deny this, right?
I wouldn't dispute it.
Okay, never mind. Thank you. Oh, okay. Wow, that's a good quote. Thank you. Oh, okay. Oh my God. Holy shit.
We're halfway to the win.
Wow, we have Trump confirmation on that. Okay. What did he say? You can either be a patriot or you could be a pussy?
Not mine, it was in the report, that you talked to him that morning and you said you could be a patriot or you can be a... Did you really say that, or is that incorrect?
I wouldn't dispute it.
Really?
I wouldn't dispute it.
And when he stepped on the stage at his rally just before his supporters stormed the Capitol, Trump directed his and their anger toward Pence.
If Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election. If he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country.
Pence did the right thing. He defied Trump when it mattered most, igniting the fury of the rioters. One of the many unbelievable things about that day is that as the Capitol was evacuated and rioters called for Pence's death, Trump never bothered to check on his safety. I asked the former president about that. Rather than condemning the chance to hang his vice president, Trump seemed to justify them.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about
No, I
safety?
thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. No,
You heard those chants. That was terrible. I mean, those, you know,
he could have. Well, the people were very angry.
They're saying hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent,
We heard this.
right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
He went on to talk at length about how it was, quote, common sense that Pence should have acted to overturn the election.
If Pence did what you wanted, you think you would still be in the White House?
I think we would have won, yeah.
Can you ever forgive him for that?
I don't know, because I picked him, I like him, I still like him, but I don't know that I can forgive him.
Angry and bitter in defeat, this is what Trump said when I asked him about his list of potential running mates if he were to run again.
I mean, I assume Pence is no longer on that list.
Well, I didn't say that,
But I mean, I can assume that, can't I?
They've taken the lead.
Why did Trump agree to do this interview?
did the wrong thing.
Yeah.
He's a very nice man. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
I like his family so much, but he did. It was a tragic mistake.
There's no response to any of this from Mike Pence yet, but George, the real question is the one that you asked just now, Senator Barrasso.
Is this the guy? Is this Jonathan Karl? I don't know what the fuck this guy is.
Heads up, the opposing team is closing in on the
Republican
scoring
leaders and to
threshold.
Republican rank and file
Yes.
voters, as Donald Trump is very clearly suggesting that
Oh,
he
wait, here's this guy.
is planning to run, or at least strongly considering running
It's
for
this guy,
president
right?
again. Can those Republicans support somebody who defended rioters calling for the execution of his former vice president? That's the question for every Republican
Oh, it is. It's this
leader.
guy on the right. Okay.
Well, you saw Senator Brussels certainly didn't want to criticize it. Meantime, you report on that Alice Mellon or Mark Meadows. That's presumably one of the documents that is caught up in this executive privilege fight
Okay.
right now that is going to the court that
You
Donald Trump
win
wants to
the
shield. And Mark
next
Meadows now could be facing the same fate as Steve Bannon, being held in contempt of Congress.
The committee sure suggested that they're going to consider holding him in contempt. I'm sure Meadows is watching very closely what happens to Bannon. But this is a very important document, George. On New Year's Eve, it is from from Meadows himself, forwarded to Mike Pence's chief of staff, and it outlines in very clear detail what should be done on January 6th to effectively overturn the election, to effectively have a coup. This is Mark Meadows forwarding a memo not from an outside lawyer, but from a lawyer for the campaign, Jenna Ellis.
5, 4, 3, 2.
We're ahead now. Keep up the pace. They're in the lead. Let's get it back.
Current GOP
I don't know if I have this video yet, but this is pretty important, I think.
presidential candidate and former Vice President Mike Pence says that the latest indictment of former President Trump by special counsel Jack Smith reminds us that, quote, anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. The indictment mentions the former vice president or his office more than 100 times in its 45 pages and quotes from notes that he took about conversations with the former president Donald Trump. The one-time allies are now facing off in the 2024 presidential race, and the former vice president Mike Pence joins us now from his home state of Indiana, where he is fresh off a speech. Mr. Vice President, good to have you with us today. Thank you very much for joining us.
What the fuck is Pence doing these days? Can we get Pence on bridges? Oh my god. What does he do anything now? Is he just like chilling?
Thanks for having me on, Marvin.
You know, so obviously when we have spoken in recent weeks, it's been about the issues of this campaign, and I do want to ask you about that. But obviously this is a big story yesterday, and you have been obviously involved in it. Yesterday you said that you'd have more to say about the indictment when you had a chance to review it. So what do you say about it today, now that you've had that opportunity, sir?
Well, Martha, let me say, on January 20th, 2017, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution. It was a promise I made to the American people, but it also ended with a prayer, so help me God. And all 4 years, all the way up to that fateful day on January 6th, I kept my promise that I made to Almighty God and to the American people. And I think yesterday's indictment will stand either on its own merits or it will fall. I can't really speak to the legal arguments behind it, but I think the American people deserve to know that on that day, the President asked me to choose between him and the Constitution, and I chose the Constitution.
Between him and the Constitution? You mean
You won the round.
he
Nice
asked you to be a
work.
patriot or a pussy?
And I always will. And I want the American people to know, as I stand for the Republican nomination for President of the United States, that I'll keep faith with the Constitution. And I do believe that while there has been weaponization at the Justice Department, and we certainly lived through it through the Trump-Pence years, that at the end of the day, history will hold Donald Trump accountable for his reckless words and actions on that day. And I'll always stand by the truth of that and make sure the American people know why I did what I did, Martha. I mean, I had no right to overturn the election. And despite the fact that President Trump has continued to insist that over the last 2.5 years, I want people to know that I stood strong on the Constitution that day, by God's grace, and I always will.
You know, you may have heard his attorneys last night saying that this is a free speech discussion. That's all it was, and that all they asked you to do was to just take a pause that day. John Eastman emailed your legal counsel stating, I implore you to consider one more relatively minor violation of the Electoral Count Act and adjourn for 10 days to allow the legislators to...
Please break the law. Is there not a more clear crime fraud exception for legal counsel? I mean, I don't even know if you would qualify, because it's not like Eastman is Pence's lawyer. Christ! Was this in the indictment? I don't remember reading this in the indictment. I implore you to consider one more law breaking and adjourn for 10 days. Just one more law break. Christ.
to finish their investigations and a full forensic audit of what he called the massive amount of illegal activity that has occurred here. They're saying all you needed to do was just take a pause. What do you say to that?
I say that's completely false, and
It's in the lower right. Yeah, I see it says Trump. I just don't remember reading it. Oh, fuck. Don't tell Piso. He's going to say we didn't actually read the indictment. Oh, no. Delete the VOD, August. Oh, no.
Saying all you needed to do was just take a pause. What do you say to that?
I say that's completely false, and it's contrary to American history, to our Constitution, and to the laws of this country, and I never considered it, Martha. Look, when the first time I heard speculation that as Vice President I'd have the authority to overturn the election by returning or rejecting votes, I frankly dismissed it out of hand. Look, the founders of this country had just won a war of independence against a king. And I was confident as a student of American history that those founders would have never vested the Vice President or anyone else with unilateral authority to decide what Electoral College votes to count and which not to count. I was clear on that throughout. I was clear with President Trump throughout, all the way up to the morning of January 6th. But let's be clear on this point. It wasn't just that they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, which would have resulted in the issue being turned over to the House of Representatives, and literally chaos would have ensued. So, Martha, I just people can read the indictment, and frankly, I've said before, I had hoped it had not come to this point. You know, I don't know if the government can meet the standard, the burden of proof beyond reasonable doubt for criminal charges, but the American people deserve to know.
Notice how he talks like he actually isn't fucking retarded, right? Like he understands how criminal court works. He understands what the burden of proof is for conviction in front of a jury. Notice how he just knows things. I still can't believe that Donald Trump doesn't know what liberalism is. Bro, what was this quote? Was it at the UN? I think Donald Trump was asked about how he feels about Western liberalism, and his interpretation is liberals on the West Coast. Hold on. Oh my fucking God. What the fuck?
Times right before arriving here was that Russia went through a lot. They lost, I guess, far more than anybody fighting the Nazis in terms of people. And he did invite me, and I said we would get back, but we will give that very serious consideration. His Thank you, comments Peter. to the Financial Times right before arriving here was that Western-style liberalism is obsolete. I know you probably haven't read the interview. Well, again, he may feel that way. I mean, he sees what's going on, and I guess if you look at what's happening in Los Angeles, where it's so sad to look, and what's happening in San Francisco and a couple of other cities, which are run by an extraordinary group of liberal people. I don't know what they're thinking, but he does see things that are happening in the United States.
I don't know if he knows anything about government at all. This is one of the cringiest my ass could make diamonds. With how insanely fucking stupid he is. He's actually so stupid.
That would probably preclude him from saying how wonderful it is. At the same time, he congratulated me as every other.
He thinks Western liberalism is like liberal cities on the West Coast. I don't think he knows what liberalism is. I don't think he even knows what that means.
Every other leader of every country did for what we've done economically, because we probably have the strongest economy we've ever had. And that's a real positive. But I'm very embarrassed by what I see in some of our cities, where the politicians are either afraid to do something about it, or they think it's votes, or I don't know what, Peter, I don't know what they're thinking. But when you look at Los Angeles, when you look at San Francisco, when you look at some of the other cities, and not a lot, but you don't want it to spread. And at a certain point, I think the federal government maybe has to get involved. We can't let that continue to happen to our cities. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'll see some of you in South Korea, maybe at the DMZ, but this has been an honor. Thank you all very much.
Secure to capture. Keep up the pace.
Exclusive audio. No shot is this the audio that I think it is. No shot. Please don't just be Hutchinson testimony. Please don't just be Hutchinson testimony.
Were you worried about him during that siege? Were you worried about his
No,
safety?
I thought he was well protected, and I had heard that he was in good shape. No, because I had heard he was in very good shape.
Wait, hold on. Give me 25 seconds. One second.
But no.
You heard those chants? That was terrible. I mean,
He could have. Well, the people were very angry.
They're saying hang Mike.
Because it's common sense. It's common sense
that
They just tied it up.
you're
Let's
supposed to
just
protect.
inject
How
it
can
now.
you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
Jesus, imagine not saying anything. Was this Jonathan Carl? I feel like I've referenced this Carl interview a couple times, but I haven't actually seen the interview. Was it just never released, or are we just missing something? Okay, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to, if you're in the middle of something, we can talk another time, but I wanted to do like a post-mortem of the,
I'm in the middle of this
conversation we had.
all the fucking time, so. You got it. What's up?
Yeah, how did you think that debate went?
Your opponent is going for a capture.
I mean, okay, I guess it's frustrating, but I mean, it was probably as good as it could have gone. It's just another example of like conservatives being completely and totally unable to engage substantively with basically anything that Donald Trump has done, and it just continues to show that they have to either outright lie, engage in bad faith, or do whatever they can to divert or pivot from any of the substance. You know.
Is this going to be the new like Andrew Wilson sort of form of debate where you try to narrow the scope of the framing or the premise to something that is basically impossible to defend? Like, how did you feel about them? I mean, did you think that they were on to anything at all when they were talking about like democracy being on the ballot being literally the end of democracy, like I guess?
If they
Your
were,
opponent is going for a capture.
I would never ever say it to somebody that whose entire party revolves around words like communism or phrases like open borders. So I'm not even having that conversation with them. It's not even, they're not even close to being deserved of having the respect of even having that conversation. So no. In like an absolute vacuum, is it a tad hyperbolic? I guess, but I feel like everybody knows what you're talking about, right? Like if I was to fight on, somebody says, I think Kamala Harris is going to destroy the border. I'm not going into that debate saying, really? Destroy the border? What, do you think she's gonna bomb the walls? You think she's gonna take a pencil and erase it on the map? What do you mean? No, we're obviously gonna be arguing about whether or not her border policy is good or bad for the country. That's what we're gonna be arguing about, obviously. The idea that I would go into that debate thinking that I'm gonna argue about the literal destruction of the border is fucking stupid.
Yeah, I feel like an obvious parallel would be the emergence of the Third Reich. I'm not like a super scholar on that topic, but I do know that it took them quite a bit of time to get from like point A to point B.
Yeah, it was a process,
and during that process, they were chipping away more and more at these sort of like democratic norms that they had. So the idea that Trump could go in there and especially when we're talking about like reshaping the GOP and his image, if we're getting more and more MAGA type politicians, you increase the likelihood of something like January 6th. I mean the legal end, not the riot.
Yeah.
The chances of something like that go up substantially when more and more people in the party are trying to reflect his kind of rhetoric or sort of like ingratiate themselves with him. It was like I was almost sort of like I didn't know what to say when they were pushing back against that idea. Because to me, that just seems so obvious.
I mean, you're getting people who are saying that, like, do you think that the Civil War was a threat to democracy? Like, well, I don't know. It's a good question. Like, you're in fantasy world at this point, right? That's the whole point. But the only complaint that I have, okay, the only thing that I just wish Democrats would focus on is like, then it should just be attack, 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 attack. You do not have serious policy conversations with these people. I won't. I'm not gonna have a serious policy conversation with you when you're not living in reality. I'm not gonna sit here and defend any of my fucking policy decisions when you won't acknowledge reality. That's fucking stupid. Yeah. It shouldn't be. I got upset at Pisco yesterday morning when he was arguing with Connor over whether or not like it was a valid interpretation of the prompt for AGW and them. And I was like, why? Why are you guys even arguing this? Obviously, they're operating in bad faith. I can't believe you're even entertaining this with a real discussion.
Your opponent is going for a capture.
Right? Like, I just think it's absurd and it's insane. And you should just call these people insane, absurd, malicious, bad faith actors, and then be honest about it, and then move on from there. I'm tired of like hand-holding conservatives and giving them all the privileges of an adult while giving them all of the protections of like a retarded protected youth. Like, that's insane to me.
Yeah, I did all this prep because I figured because you've been doing so much January 6th stuff recently that I would come at it from a different angle. And so I did a whole bunch of like research in the days before on his dishonesty. We just never even got to that because like the whole thing was focused on like debating the premise of the debate. And then obviously January 6th is super salient to that topic.
Yeah, don't waste your time ever researching any substance. You will never speak substance with a MAGA tard. It will never happen. No, because you can't defend Trump on substance. It's impossible.
This is like the third time that's happened for me, but
Yep.
I also wanted to know if you could give me like a super honest critique of like my
Opponent is going
debate.
for a capture.
I didn't do any kind of debate in high school or anything like that. It's all been in this space. So if you identified any places where you thought I could improve, yeah.
I mean, I don't think you did anything wrong. I think the only issue possibly was 3-on-3 or 2-on-2 debates are very challenging because there are questions you want to ask that might like derail somebody else's like line of thought or line of questioning. And obviously my fans like to listen to me, so they thought, oh, there were times where Hutch derailed a Destiny question or somebody else. But I mean, that just happens in 2-on-2 or 3-on-3 debates. It's hard to like balance it out. It's one of the reasons I don't usually like doing them. But no, I don't think, I've never heard you debate in a way where like, ooh, you step a lot of, you did something really bad. I think sometimes you just went in directions that I wouldn't have gone, or I would have hit my point a little bit harder, but I don't think you, there's not like a huge critique I would have for any of your.
Well, I think I felt a little bit of like because you're so aggressive with the January 6th stuff, which is fine because you've done a lot of work and you know a lot of those facts now. But there was a part of me that was like, okay, I need to jump in like sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
And then after the fact, I was like, maybe I might have derailed a couple things here and there.
No, that's good. I'm just where I'm at now. I really need them to squirm and suffer when we talk about this, because we've had to bite so many bullets and deal with so much shame over the BLM riots and all of the horrible shit that happened and the property damage and every single thing bad that a Democrat does, right? That when a Republican incel decides to take shots at Trump, Biden is on the news apologizing for using fiery rhetoric like bullseye in a private call to donors. It's absurd. Like, if we're gonna be held to that standard, then I need them to squirm now on owning everything that happened here. And you can't write it off, and you can't just say it was just this or just that. Like, no bullshit. You need to own your shit.
Well, they are squirming right now. I don't know if you saw. Do you pay close attention to the polls?
I see them pop up on Twitter, but I'm not like paying particularly close attention.
Yeah, there were a few. There was like a mediocre day of polling on Friday for Kamala, and when I say mediocre, there was like one poll for Trump +1. That's like mediocre for her now.
Yeah.
And today there was an Ipsos poll that had her up 5 nationally. There was a WAPO poll that came out that had her up 5 points nationally, and more importantly, there were 2 Rasmussen polls in battleground states that had Harris up. And Rasmussen is like, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're just overtly partisan Republican poll.
Yeah.
Nobody takes them seriously. Like 538 removed them from their aggregate, so they're not doing great right now. And I think this convention's going to be just I think this is going to be a historic convention. I don't know what's going to happen with those protesters. I think that's going to get a little crazy.
Which protesters?
The pro-Palestine protesters, and there's also like echoes of 1968. The 1968 convention, I don't know if you're familiar, was highly contentious, and there was a huge anti-war protest movement that was a collection of different anti-war movements or organizations all over the country that came together in '68. There were a ton of riots in Chicago. It's in Chicago this year, so yeah, that could get off the hook. But I think this convention is going to be nuts, and I think she's going to get a nice bump from it. But yeah.
Opponent is going for a capture.
Get to the zone.
A teammate is going for a capture. Help them out. Your opponent is going for a capture. Your teammate is attempting a capture. They tied it up, but we can still get this done. Your teammate is attempting a capture. Watch out, enemy is going for a capture. They secured a capture. Let's turn things around.
Zone is up.
Your teammate is attempting a capture.
Payback. That was close. To tie.
We even the score. Now time to pull ahead.
Here comes the zone. Heating up.
A teammate is going for a capture. Help them out.
Zone active.
Your opponent is going for a capture. Your teammate is going for a capture.
Zone contested.
Capture initiated. Stand strong. You win some, you lose some. Today wasn't our day.
Team deathmatch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Let's bring home the victory. Get the most kills to bring home the win.
Round 1. Kill.
We've taken the lead. Keep it up. Halfway to the score threshold. taken the lead. We lost that round, but we're still in it. Opponent is taking the lead. We pulled into the lead. To the win. We've fallen behind. Let's turn this around. We're ahead now. Keep up the pace. We're approaching the score limit. Let's finish strong.
Heating up.
Round win. Keep it up. We've taken the lead. Keep it up.
New power weapon in the arena.
They've taken the lead. We've taken the lead. Keep it up. Keep up the pressure. We're halfway to the score threshold. We're almost there. You've got this. one round away from victory. Fallen behind. Let's turn this around. We just pulled ahead. Don't stop now. Halfway to the scoring threshold. Just a few more kills and victory is ours! Practice is paying off. This is what we trained for. Earn the most kills to secure the victory. We just pulled ahead. Don't stop now. in the lead. Let's get it back. They're closing in on the scoring limit. Let's rally. We've taken the lead. Keep it up.
1 minute to go.
Taking the lead.
Seconds remaining.
We lost that round, but we're still in it.
Five, four, three, two, one. Round two.
They've taken the lead.
New power weapon in the arena.
We've taken the lead. Keep it up.
Shut down.
Halfway to the score threshold. This is close. Don't back down. We've fallen behind. Let's turn this around. Okay, do or die time. Let's step it up this round.
Five, four, three, two, one. Round three.
We've taken the lead. Keep it up. taken the lead. Halfway to the win. We pulled into the lead.
Shut down.
They're close to the scoring limit. We have to stop them.
Shut down. One minute to go.
We've fallen behind. Let's turn this around. It's only one match. We'll learn from this and come back stronger.
Team deathmatch starts now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, you got this. Score the most kills to win the match. Opponent has taken the lead. there. They're closing in on the win. Don't let them get there. Lost that round. It's no big deal. We got this. Taking the lead. Your opponent is halfway to the scoring threshold. They're close to the scoring limit. We have to stop them. Okay, do or die time. Let's step it up this round. In the lead, let's get it back. We pulled into the lead.
Double kill. Payback.
to victory. Good work. They're in the lead. Let's get it back. They're closing in on the win. Don't let them get there. We've taken the lead. Keep it up. That's a win for the round.
Five, four, three, two, one. Round four.
We've fallen behind. Let's turn this around. We've taken the lead. Keep it up.
New power weapon in the arena.
The other team is halfway to winning. No more easy death. They've taken the lead. They're close to the scoring limit. We have to stop them.
Guardian Angel.
Just pulled ahead. Don't stop now. Way to turn things around. We're tied. One round left.
Five, four, three, two, one. Final round.
We've fallen behind. Let's turn this around.
New power weapon in the arena.
We've taken the lead. Keep it up. Halfway to victory. Good work.
A
approaching the score limit. Let's finish strong. Right win! All that practice is paying off.
Today's story is one of entrenchments, failed political intelligence, failed surveillance intelligence, and some HIMARS to boot. As Ukraine's Kursk offensive into Russian territory completes its first week, it is becoming clearer that there are serious structural problems with Moscow's preparations for such a gambit. In turn, a natural question to ask is how this could have possibly happened. Now, it is far, far too early to be writing the history books on this one. After all, Ukraine's offensive continues, with blue and yellow soldiers still pushing in new directions, even if at a slower pace. Nevertheless, the signs point to two clear contributing factors that help explain why Russian defenses failed to immediately stop Ukraine's invasion. What we are observing is a significant failure on the part of Russian intelligence. And to make the problem worse for the Kremlin, it is not just one segment of its intelligence apparatus at fault. No, this required the combined failures of what we might call political intelligence, that is, the ability to deduce what your opponents are politically willing or unwilling to do, and surveillance intelligence, that is, the ability to cut through the fog of war and see what is actually happening out there in the world. In short, Russia failed to understand that Ukraine had the political ability to conduct the Kursk offensive, and it failed to observe the actions that might have otherwise mitigated the damage from the first failure. The result is an invasion of Russian territory for the first time since World War II, and the potential for a political crisis in Moscow. But the full story is inevitably a little more complicated. Today's puzzle will have 4 pieces. The constraints on Russian manpower that created the dilemmas that follow. The underlying problems that led to Moscow underestimating Ukraine's political will. How frontline defenses are supposed to work in this type of situation. And how surveillance intelligence failed to allow that system to function as intended. But we begin with the primary constraint that the Kremlin faces: manpower. There seems to be a myth that Russia has an unlimited pool of humanity to throw at the war. But the myth that it is, that belief is misleading. Yes, if this were a fantasy draft, and you had to pick either Ukraine's or Russia's populations, without any other considerations, you would be crazy not to go with the bear team. But executing a war plan requires both the baseline resource and the political will to tap it. And it is the latter that has befuddled Moscow for almost 2 years. September 2022's mobilization was done out of a military emergency, with Ukraine pushing Russian troops out of the Kharkiv region, and Russia well short of the men needed to defend the front line. But the Kremlin received a clear message in the mobilization's aftermath: do it again at the regime's peril. Since a young Vladimir Putin came to power, Russia's implicit social contract has dictated that the politically powerful populations in Moscow and St. Petersburg will be left alone. And, in exchange, the Kremlin would do what it wanted to do with its foreign policy. The special military operation was to continue in that tradition, but mobilization broke it. Those fortunate few with the necessary means fled the country to places like Turkey and the United Arab Emirates. and Russia's per capita conscription ultimately tilted away from the country's empowered western regions. Indeed, the blowback and response signaled a deeper transition. In the absence of compelled service, Russia shifted to voluntary contracts. Although more politically expedient, the problem with voluntary contracts is that, despite the name, the individuals are not volunteers. You actually have to pay them. And, increasingly, you have to pay them a lot. Now, it is easy to take a casual look at the Russian economy and conclude that the country is undergoing a boom period. After all, GDP was up in 2023 by 3.6%, despite the war. The trouble is that despite is not the right descriptor. Because of is more accurate. To explain what is happening here, and at the risk of sabotaging my viewer retention, we need to talk macroeconomics for a moment. GDP pretends to be the almighty metric of a country's economic health. But what is it really?
They captured the zone.
Well,
Let's respond.
its formula is consumption, plus investment, plus net exports, plus government spending. How does this work out for Russia? Western sanctions have pounded net exports, but government spending has accelerated to extreme levels to produce everything for the war. Hence, Russian GDP is
Watch
up,
out, enemy is
even
going
as
for a
better
capture.
indicators like the 9.1% official inflation rate or 18% central bank interest rate paint a far grimmer picture. Cognizant of this, Ukraine has attempted to hit the highest value targets possible, hammering refineries and attempting to bankrupt the Russian energy industry.
Opponent is going for a capture.
Moscow has needed to show some judiciousness in its recruiting, despite Russia's dominant population size. Now, that may not last forever, and the Kursk incursion conceivably will change Moscow's calculus. However, at least for almost the last 2 years, the Kremlin has leaned more toward regime survival than maximizing effectiveness in the war. That takes us to the Kremlin's first intelligence failure. Well, more precisely, the first intelligence failure of the current situation. The first intelligence failure occurred back in February 2022, but that is a 40-minute story for another video.
Stand strong.
Constrained by money, and thus constrained on manpower, the Kremlin still had to decide how to allocate its troops on 2 fronts. First, its offensive in eastern Ukraine, and second, defense along its border. Obviously, the Kremlin wanted to shift as many resources into eastern Ukraine as possible.
Opponent is going for a capture.
Sports, defense may win championships, but over in Russian-occupied Ukraine, it certainly was not going to yield massive territorial gains. Now, why further expansion in Ukraine was a priority for the Kremlin remains an open question. Perhaps Russian strategists calculated that Ukraine was vulnerable there, which may still be the case. To wit, Russia has made steady gains there, even if they have come at an astonishingly high human price. On the other hand, perhaps these gains are more of a political necessity, that the regime will be in danger if it cannot at least cobble together all of the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. Either way, every Russian soldier stationed to the north was one fewer human working toward that goal. Thus, the Kremlin had to ask itself what was the fewest number of soldiers it could place along the border. Answering that required thinking about what the chances were that Ukraine might take such an action. 3 pieces of information appear to be telling in that regard. First is that, for all of the problems that Russia was having with manpower, Ukraine seemed to be having it worse. In contrast to Russia, this was less of a political problem. Basically, everyone in Ukraine is directly affected by the war in some way, and more of a sheer numbers problem. Ukraine's population is less than 30% of Russia's, and the lack of babies following the fall of the Soviet Union was doing it no favors. That all suggested that Ukraine could not try a border incursion without damaging its position along the eastern defensive perimeter. Second was prior raids. Earlier incursions demonstrated that leaving the border completely undefended would be a bad idea. Back to the map. This is Kursk, where the current offensive is. But we need to rewind to May 2023 and head slightly southeast to Belgorod. That month, Russian dissidents staged
teammate is
attacks
going
there,
for a capture.
with
Help them
logistical
out.
support from Ukraine. A handful of other similar but smaller incursions also occurred that year. The key point, though, is that the underlying intent in these
Watch
cases
out, enemy
was
is going for a
harassment.
capture.
The groups wanted to raise their public profiles, and Ukraine was happy to
teammate is
provide
attempting a
support
capture.
just to irk the Kremlin. At no point were they capable of meaningfully penetrating into
Another
Russia,
round win.
never mind
But we're not
holding
done
territory.
yet. Let's
They were
focus.
there to hit easy targets and run away, nothing more. Third, and connected to the second, was U.S. reluctance to support attacks inside of Russia. Washington is a major supplier of Ukrainian arms, but has been reluctant to approve of U.S. weapons use in Russia, and has outright criticized measures like attacking refineries. This reflects concerns in Washington that escalation in this manner invites some type of reaction from Russia. And even putting aside the nuclear rhetoric that the United States might not have believed, this concern was reasonable. Russia was already engaging in lethal covert
Your opponent
actions
is going
connected
for a
to the war.
capture.
Consequently, think about the Kremlin's perspective here. An outright invasion of Russia, with authentic
Your teammate
Ukrainian
going for a
troops on the
capture.
ground, would have only frustrated the Biden administration even more, or so it would have seemed. And if Ukraine used American-supplied weapons,
Watch out, enemy
well,
is going
surely
for a capture.
that would have had to have been unacceptable to the White House, right? This, of course, is all speculation regarding an unclear
Capture in
situation.
progress. Hold your ground.
But consider what Russian intelligence would infer from all
Your
of
teammate
this.
is attempting a
Would
capture.
it be safe to leave the border completely undefended? Almost certainly not, given that there were previous incursions. But does border security need to prepare for multiple brigades of Ukrainian soldiers,
Watch out, enemy
armed
is going
to
for
the
a
hilt
capture.
with Uncle Sam's party supplies?
Your
Sure,
teammate
it
is
is a
attempting
possibility,
capture.
but not something that you need to bank on. From the perspective of someone on August 1st,
Count it. Draw
2024,
capture.
the most likely thing to happen was more of those small raids. Okay, let's pause here for a second and do something weird. I want to work on a puzzle that often vexes my students who are new to game theory. Suppose that to stop a Ukrainian attack, Russia needs 10 troops per kilometer of
going for a
border to
capture.
halt a full-on invasion, 2 troops per kilometer of border to stop the small raids, and none if nothing is going to happen. Make things easy, you automatically succeed if above the corresponding threshold, and automatically fail
Teammate is going for a
otherwise.
capture. Help them out.
Further, your intelligence organization is
Watch
telling
out,
you
enemy
that
is going
there
for a
is a
capture.
24% chance that there will be an invasion, a 75% chance that there will be a small raid, and a 1% chance that there will be nothing. Given all of that, how should Russia go about choosing how many
got
to
a
deploy,
capture. Score is
remembering that each soldier on the border is one fewer fighting in Ukraine? Well, the trap that new students sometimes fall into is averaging out the threat. That is, they want to weigh the number of necessary soldiers by the relative likelihood of each potential threat, and then choose the corresponding average. Here, that would be 10 times
Going for a
0.24,
capture.
plus 2 times 0.75, plus 0 times 0.01, which works out to be 3.9 soldiers per kilometer. It seems like a reasonable course of action, and it is
Your
mathematically
teammate
literate.
is going for a capture.
But one problem. It is a bad way to work through strategy. When potential
out, enemy
threats
is going
fall
for a
under
capture.
distinct categories like this, the average does not matter. What does is whether the next soldier deployed
tied up.
is pivotal to
Crunch
victory.
time for the final round.
Remember, anything less than 2 stops nothing, and anything between 2 and 10 only stops small raids. When you have 3.9 soldiers per kilometer out there, well, first of all, pity the 1 soldier per kilometer who is missing 10% of his body. But second, you either have 1.9 too many, or 6.1 too few. That is, you have more than you need to defeat a raid, but you are still going to lose when facing a large invasion. And, like I said, it is a common pitfall. I asked a similar question a couple of days ago, and the plurality of viewers went with the weighted average. Now, everyone who answered 5 is not inherently wrong. In their minds, they may
teammate is
be
going for a
adding
capture.
extra
Help them out.
conditions, like how having 5 might give them a chance against a large invasion. But choosing it just because it is the weighted average is not a good strategy. And credit to you guys, many of you figured out exactly why the weighted average is a trap. Now, in practice, whether you should actually send 0, 2, or 10 depends on a bunch of things, like how costly the deployments are, how you value each possible outcome, and whether, in practice, deploying 2 meaningfully impacts your ability to weather the storm against a large invasion. For example, if you do not care at all about what happens on the border, or find soldier deployments to be incredibly expensive, then it is possible to justify 0, even though 99% of the time bad things will happen. On the other hand, if you find a successful invasion to be politically backbreaking, then deploying 10 makes sense, even though 76% of the time it will be overkill. Russia's thinking, it seems, fell in the middle. You could not have raids go uncontested. At the same time, though, full-scale assaults were relatively unlikely, and you really wanted to win in the East. And that is the first half of Russia's failure here. The Kremlin poorly estimated these percentages. It turned out that the United States did not really care that Ukraine was planning its own special military operation, especially after Russia started gaming the system and using its side of the border around Kharkiv as a safe haven from which to conduct an offensive. It also turned out that those earlier